Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by the Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Jim Hilton and he's Matt Pippin Auletta. And today we're breaking down the Week 10 21-18 win for the New York Empire over the DC Breeze. If you've been living on a rock, you might have missed the fact that the Empire are now at 24 straight wins overall and 27 consecutive wins at home. And they've also beat DC for the 10th time in the last 11 meetings. And I think that's where we have to start, Matt, in that DC always plays New York tough. Of all of these 10 of 11 matchups, over half of them have been decided by 2 goals or less. And even this one was 3, but DC had a lead in the third that we'll talk about. They were up 14-13 at a point, and it always feels close. It always feels like DC is nipping at the heels, but nipping at the heels usually means that you have not overcome your opponent, and that is what seems to happen over and over and over and over again. And the gut punches come in every different way over the course of the last now 4 years for DC. It's just, New York beating them at home is going to take everything that a team possibly has and just a little bit more than that. And it winds up being another comprehensive victory for New York.
Yeah, and it's crazy because just a few years before that, it was flipped. Every time we played DC, we just kept losing these nail biters over and over and over. So really happy to see these scales evening here and really just DC getting what I feel like they deserved all those years ago.
And then when these two teams meet potentially again, with Philadelphia winning over the weekend, they're 5-4. Boston, they beat Toronto, so Toronto's probably out of that 3-seed race. But whether it's Boston or Philadelphia making a run at upsetting DC are still going to be the favorite in that game. So you'd have to think the third time around that these two teams meet, they're going to meet at New York's place at Joseph Facina Field, which does make it difficult. And if you're DC, I think you also can go into that one, having come out of this one, again, taking the lead, feeling like maybe you do have some excuses. You were missing 6 regulars, including head coach Daryl Stanley. There were moments in that game, including a timeout, which is a few seconds at the end of the quarter, where I do have to wonder if Daryl would have gone and done it differently. But I also want to give Alice Crew credit for finding ways to come back in the third there. And then you also talk about all the players at U24s. AJ Merriman, Jock Nissen, Ben Ort at U24s, Joe Merrill dealing with a foot injury, Cole Jurek with a game-time decision and dealing with a foot injury himself. I don't think he looked entirely healthy in that game, but he got it out anyway, and you kind of make do with what you have.
Yeah, you can make slight excuses on both sides. Empire were missing Jack Williams for pretty much, I think, the entire third quarter. Maybe just a heat issue. I talked to him very briefly on the sideline. He said he was feeling all right, just needed a few minutes. He was kind of sitting with some ice on his head and just kind of cooling off. And then, sure enough, the offense without Elliot Chartok and Jack Williams in there in the third quarter, they stalled out a little bit, which was a little surprising because they can plug in so many good players. But truthfully, those 2 players are, I think, top 2 or 3 on the team on offensive efficiency, and it shows. They are primarily the main disc movers. Rushmeyer Bailey gets a lot of touches and moves the disc as well, but that's just one guy. So once some of those key cogs are not there, the offense struggled a little bit. They looked a little more mortal, and DC, to their credit, played great defense and, as you said, took the lead there for a little bit.
Yeah, it was interesting because the Breeze did mount their comeback in the third there without Jack, taking a 14-13 lead at one point. And it's interesting because it comes back to the fact that Jack comes back for the fourth or part of the fourth, and then Weinberg immediately sends him on a 60-yard run where he lays out onto his stomach, which is, always that's what's going to happen if you miss a quarter for any kind of reason. And there were rumors about the air quality, as you mentioned, and the heat was dealing. Different players were dealing with things. There was oxygen on the sideline too, but it was confirmed after the game that by the trainer Ryan Anderson that it was at worst food poisoning, but likely just some kind of gastro issue, either brought on by the heat or brought on by, Jack doesn't have some kind of crazy diet or lifestyle that we're keyed into. But I think more than even what the Empire weren't with Jack around, the focus really should be on Ryan Osgar, I think, for this game, of course, because once again, Osgar has been it was Jeff Babbitt in their first matchup week 3, but Osgar has been the Achilles heel over the last, now, what we say, 6 or 7 total matchups against DC, because I don't know what they can do about him going forward. He had 4 goals, 8 assists, 1 hockey assist, about 500 yards of total offense, and he did help them out with 2 Huck turnovers where he overshot his receiver, but both teams did a bunch of that, overshooting their receivers in the second half, and I think that kind of evened itself out. And as far as the individual matchups, he's a bit too quick for David Cranston, and he's a bit too quick for David Bloodgood. He's too tall and vertically explosive for Jasper Tom. So I just individual matchups. You look on that D line for. I mean, even Rowan McDonald. You don't want to have Rowan having to face Osgar because as almost perfect a shape that Rowan is in, has some of the best lungs in the entire AUDL, regardless of his age. Yet you don't want to have Rowan having to chase around Oscar. Like, you just don't want to do that on the points that, well, Rowan did play offense for that for this game, but if he is playing back on the D line, if Jock Nissen is back and Ben Orr is back, then Rowan will get a few more D points. And even in those D points for Rowan, you don't want to have him chasing around Oscar. So I just match up individual wise. I don't know what DC could possibly do, or who could be the possible answer on Oscar to just slow him down. Because even if you do force him in one direction or the other, again, that leaves space that Babbitt didn't really get that space this time around. They did a good job adjusting to him. But again, that left Osgar with way too much time and space in the middle of that field to execute, to decide when to throw, when to use his legs. If you push him in the end zone, he's going to score that way. If you do force him to huck deep, he had some hucks that he got off, and those are important of opening up that space both vertically and horizontally. I mean, he was fantastic.
Yeah, there was some earlier season talk about Babbitt maybe being the MVP. He was having some crazy statistical goal scoring things. I mean, basically putting the team on his back at certain points, just grinding for easy goals at the cone, which most players can't just get as consistently. But when it all comes down to it, really, as the season progresses and Ryan Osgar is there, just either distributing or winning with his legs, he's doing it all. I mean, he is definitely playing like one of the league MVPs again, for sure. And as you said, I mean, DC could try and cover him different ways, but really, I think it's going to come down to finding ways to help both under and deep. Because if you just let him cut under, he's going to slice you up with those throws. And if you let him cut deep, I mean, you can't just let him cut deep. He's shown that he can just beat you with his legs deep also. I mean, and he's got decent vertical. He reads well. It just, yeah, he beats you. Whatever you take away, he's going to take the other way if he really needs to, and that's what an MVP needs to do.
Yeah, Osgar was as good as he's been all season long in that game. That was the marquee Ryan Osgar game. I feel like this season we were kind of waiting for it. We were kind of waiting for one game where, like, oh, Ryan Osgar really ascended, took that next level, took that game where it needed to be. And it did have a lot to do, I think, in that third with Jack being out and not 100% in the second half, when Osgar just called his own number and was the player, just stepped up and was the player the Empire needed him to be. Interestingly enough, though, the guys that you interviewed in the post game, we'll talk a little bit about the 10-year anniversary in a second. But Ryan Dross, it doesn't matter if it's 9 years for him and 10 years for Mike Dross. I mean, Ryan was so essential, and there was the two plays in that game. One obviously comes offensively at the end of the third quarter when DC is up 14-13, and then it goes up. Ryan Osgar throws it with 1 second remaining to the back of the end zone, and Jeff Babbitt is there with three bodies around him. And of course, Solomon versus Meyer Bailey just pops up at the very corner of the end zone. And that was a back-breaking way to end that third quarter for DC, which is, at that point, you got the feeling. It was 14-14, but the Empire received to start the fourth. And you got that feeling that DC, they were up, they had it, they could have gone to the fourth up 14-13. And even though the Empire started with the disc, they were still going to be, in theory, up by that break. And once that buzzer beater happened, you felt like a little bit of air just kind of came out of the stadium for DC. And then, I mean, big-time players make big-time plays, and it's not just the stars. The score is 15-14 New York, 10-20 in the fourth, and then Ryan Dross gets the block on Cole Jurek. I already mentioned that foot injury. He did not look 100%, that being Jurek, so Ryan Dross just runs through the disc, gets it one throw away from the end zone, and now New York is up by 2 again. Now it's another break. After that, 17-14, Ryan gets 2 more blocks from that point, and even though DC eventually scored, a lot of time came off that clock, and it reminds you that New York's defense, they grind you down by the fourth quarter every single week. So even if you've won a quarter, even if you've won the third and taken some kind of lead over the course of 2 different quarters, and Oscar had a quote about this after the game, that New York just does not lose back-to-back quarters in the same half. It does not happen. And so even if you get it, the New York defense is still just going to grind you and grind you and grind you. And it doesn't matter if it's their D1, their D2, those turnovers happen because again, their quote unquote D2 has one of Yacht or Randolph or even Babbitt at end of quarter points. Like it does not matter. They're going to have somebody who's going to make things difficult outside of just all of the Josue Loros and the Matt Labars and the Ryan Dross and Mike Dross and the players that just consistently do and grind you down. Ben Katz. It's just that New York D line, as we'll preview at the end of this, between Colorado and Salt Lake, to me are still the difference between that game. As good as we talk about the offense every single week, the defense is what's going to potentially take down either or both of those teams out west, and then I think it's definitely the Empire's key to the postseason.
Yeah, I mean the defense is just remarkable. I was down on the sideline for most of this game as opposed to being up in the booth watching or just watching on the stream. And I was kind of shocked at how much they were smothering DC all over the field. Ryan got 3 blocks; they were all good, but 2 of them are almost just a result of, well, probably all of them in a sense. I mean, this goes for everybody's blocks, but there was just so much pressure all over the place that people were going to get blocks because there were no easy resets. There were no free throws. Just everything was tough. Everything DC needed to just work so hard for every little bit of space that eventually that's where blocks come from too much pressure, too much, poaching, switching, grinding, help, just everything. Just the defense was smothering everybody. So blocks are going to come from there. And, Ryan got 3 nice ones as a result of that. Yeah, they're just overwhelming. Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah, I'll repeat the same thing I said when I was on the sideline for that Atlanta game, that you just don't understand watching on the stream or even from the stands how much pressure Antoine Davis puts on those receivers. Like, because he doesn't get a lot of numbers. The counting stats since he arrived to New York, they just aren't there. Like, we used to talk about Antoine Davis as a player with much more reverence, but if you are on the sideline, watch the amount of time and space that his receivers have. They have none. So by the fourth quarter, if you've had Antoine Davis, you've basically had to stretch yourself for every catch you've had, right? You've had somebody within 2 feet of you every single time you've cut, every single time you've caught the disc, and that does wear a player down over the course of time. And because you just feel that step, you feel that presence in your head for 4 quarters. I mean, and you and I have both handled it. It's exhausting. And there are times by the fourth where you're just like, do I want to make this cut? Do I want to get myself open because I know he's coming? Like, do I want to be the reason why if I don't completely 100% lay out through this disc or run through this disc that we get a turn in that instance because here comes Antoine Davis just over and over and over and over again. And yeah, to be on the sideline for that, that's where you really see it. You see how athletic Antoine can be. And I mean, we didn't even mention Marquez. It's the same thing. Marquez's pressure is just unrelenting on those handlers over and over and over again on every swing.
He was so close to a lot of those. There was a point in the game, I think on the earlier end, where they probably got the reset or the dump off to his assignment like 2 or 3 times in a row, which is nothing. But every single time from the sideline, I was like, oh, he's about to get a D. Oh, he's going to hit that. Oh, he's going to hit that. And like, it did get around him, but just so close. I mean, we're talking inches around his hand every time. So yeah, the pressure all over the field is crazy. And, I played in this league for a while. The defense that I faced at practice from Empire was always typically tougher than what I saw in games. And I'm sure that hasn't changed. I mean, the pressure they were putting on these players was just otherworldly. They were just smothering them on a giant field, and there was still no separation.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about the numbers here. Mike Dross did not get AD. He got that exclamation point goal at the end, but he's at 198 blocks. Ryan now sits at 196. And I know, Matt, it's your favorite storyline because of friendship with the Dross, and with now Colorado and Salt Lake and Montreal left on the docket, and Mike Dross reportedly missing the Friday against Colorado. So Mike will likely be there for Salt Lake on Sunday, and then for Montreal on the 22nd of July. And for Ryan, he is likely available for all 3. So does Ryan wind up, no pun intended, but pipping Mike to 200 here? Or does Mike get 2 against Salt Lake? Or do neither get either, then they both break it together against Montreal, with maybe Ryan gets 2 more, right, against Colorado Salt Lake, and then Mike gets 0, then they both get 2 against against Montreal. I mean, that would really be the perfect story, right? At home against Montreal, they both get the same number and they both get a 200 at the same time. To me, there's some kind of synergy there, but I would love it if Ryan winds up beating him by getting 4 against Colorado, right? Just like get it done, do your job. Ryan gets the 200 first against Colorado.
No,
Then it's
no.
on.
I,
It's
I,
on
th- I think if they did it together on the same night, it would be beautiful. It would be perfect.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think the New York would love it if they did it against Salt Lake because I think they're going to need every single one of those blocks. Interestingly enough, because I think that no disrespect to DC, but that D for the Empire forced 11 blocks and DC turned it over 16 times. And this is actually interesting here because New York turned it 13 times and DC only had 5 blocks. So I know DC looks bad when I read those numbers, but 16 turnovers for DC and 13 for New York are well below both teams' season averages. And New York's are also skewed by the weather because half their games have been played in disgusting, awful weather. I mean, including this one. I mean, this one with the air quality being the way it was, with that weird humidity and heat, the game, it felt a little sloppy, but the coaches all used the term gritty. And based on the limited turnovers, I would have to agree with that. Where it felt sloppy, but it wasn't. It was gritty. It was that both teams and both defenses were forcing turnovers, were forcing mistakes. But even then, neither team really made that many mistakes or had that many turnovers. It just felt like that, I think, because the game in totality was, again, a grindy game where you had to fight for everything the way you did. And so I don't want to take anything away from those defenses in that way. But I think before we move on to the Colorado Salt Lake thing, I just want to do the alumni night. That's what it was over the weekend. So it was great to have you on sideline again, talking to the Dross and seeing all the former Empire players, not all of them, but a bunch from the past. And it's interesting to me because I know we've rehashed this topic over and over again, but at 9-0, the Empire clinches home field advantage in the East playoffs and the regular season title. Doing it on alumni night was cool to me, and we keep hearing it, but it bears repeating. Franchises usually don't work this way, but the Empire's 10 years feel like one total project here. From 2013 to now, it feels like an ascent. And in franchise, you don't do that. Franchises do not. You don't go from. I mean, Salt Lake could say they've done it in 2 years, right? They've gone from one to 2, but after this season being undefeated, where they are now 10-0, if they win the title or they not, like where do they go from here? But for New York, it does feel like from 2013 all the way up to now that it has been the continuation of a total project with Cat Stevens, Mike Dross, and Brian Dross still playing a part in all of it. And I mean, I think you said it before, and it does, again, bear repeating that from 2013, that roster, there were talented players, and there are players who were essential to the history of the Empire. But the talent that's on the field now in that 20, it's difficult to say who would you want from 2013 or 14 and put them on the team now. There are players that, of course, make the team that would be contributors on the team, but there are just so much talent on the New York Empire today. It does feel in a weird way with other teams don't have this, like you're an impossibility of comparing eras. You absolutely cannot compare eras because what the Empire used to be and the identity of the faceless mop and all that stuff to now what the Empire are with all these big superstar national names and all these things. It's two different teams, sure. But again, to me, I feel like the better way to say it would be the Empire have always been on this steady ascent.
Yeah, we were always kind of gave ourselves the name the Faceless Mob for a while, which in a sense was true. We weren't exactly superstar studded, but every year, in and out, we had a lot of really good players. Some didn't stick around forever. We had the one year with Noah Saul, who was an amazing teammate and a great player. I really liked playing with Noah. And then, of course, with him was Matt Bode, Justin Allen. And then in other years, we had some other great guys that played in the New York club scene. They come and go. We had Grant Lindsay for a year, Bo Kittredge for 2 years. I mean, it's just, it's littered with stars, even if the defense kind of was always just this overwhelming mass of like, who is that guy and why is he D'ing me?
Yeah, I mean, even the 2013 year, St. Carnegie was just he was the focus of the offense and got a ton of Ds. And yeah, I think that has always been the blend of New York Ultimate. And I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, then clearly you're in the know on this stuff. But whether it was Taylor Brooks and Izzy Bryant and Ben Ivers and Matt Lamar and CJ Willett, I mean, players of the New York Ultimate scene have always been, we'll say, the backbone of the team. But yeah, you're right. It's not just Jack and Osgar and Babbitt and Yacht showed up and led the Empire to a new place along with Bo. But there's always been this mix of players who were, we'll say, commodities elsewhere. I mean, look at the way that if you say the name Billy Katz, who helped the Empire win their first playoff game in history against Philly in 2013 in the 2-3 matchup. You talk about Billy Katz. He's a Seattle, right? I know he became a West Coast, but he really is a West Coast Ultimate player. Like you don't really compare him or think of him as a New York Ultimate player. Same thing with Carnegie. Like he's gone out and he's really had his career on the West Coast as much as he was played for New York for the years he did. And then the same thing as you mentioned with Noah Saul, Justin Allen, Matt Bode. Those are Carolina Ultimate players. That is what they are. They're not New York Ultimate players. And for sure they've come in, they've come and gone. And that actually is a perfect transition. Grant Lindsley, you say that name because we'll quickly preview as we head out here. Colorado and Salt Lake is next week, that being Friday and Saturday. Colorado's 8-3 at the moment, and currently Salt Lake is 10-0. They are re-adding Joel Clutton, who was an all-defense AUDL player last year. He is, I think, 12 feet tall is what I saw on the roster.
I think he's 6'5", yeah.
Right, it's something like that. He is Lithio and yacht size for sure. They're adding him back to the team, and Salt Lake has been as good as New York has been in a different way all season long. New York has a plus 49. Salt Lake has a plus 48. As I said, Mike Dross reportedly available just for Saturday against Salt Lake and not Colorado, which could be really good with the altitude. And even the way that their offense is built. Their offense is built in the same way as New York offense is built, in that they outwork you. You have Jordan Kerr being Ryan Osgar, and their O-line is just so athletic. Jorgensen's, both of them, Will Selfridge on there, Sean Knoll with some huge big throws. One of the best huckers in the league this year. They have a really, really, really deep team as well. Jacob Miller, arguably an MVP candidate on their O-line. I mean, I guess I don't want to call him a reset handler. I guess he's kind of like their main, they're the hub of their offense. But I mean, in a sense, when somebody else takes over downfield, then he does kind of become arguably the best reset handler in the entire league this year. And yeah, Salt Lake is very, very, very good. And I want to hear the argument. If the Empire, I mean, this is their biggest challenge, I think, other than obviously maybe more in championship weekend last year. But I mean, this arguably Salt Lake is the best team the Empire have played since when? Like, when was the last time when the Empire played the team that was them? That is such an overwhelming championship favorite along with the Empire. I don't know. I'm not sure when the last time, because even the Flyers in 2021 who beat the Empire, their last loss, the Flyers were the 4 seed going into the playoffs. They were peaking at the right time, right? But they weren't this unstoppable juggernaut like the Empire were.
They were pretty good at the end of that season. I would have to disagree. I thought they were the Flyers in 2021 when they ended up winning the championship. I mean, going into the playoffs those last few weeks, they were very impressive.
I know, but I'm saying, like, didn't they start like 2-4? That's what I'm saying. Like, they started, they won like 10 straight or 12 straight.
I think some of those college guys weren't available, and the team was just kind of. I mean, they had a tough early schedule. I mean, losing a game or two in the beginning, and then you kind of figure it all out. I mean, I think, yeah, they weren't undefeated, sure, but that was a very good team.
Of course, yeah, I'm not taking anything away from that team. That team is excellent. But I guess what I'm saying is, I mean, you understand what I'm saying, that like at home for Salt Lake, I mean, on the second day of a back-to-back, I mean, yeah, I mean, even though they lost that Carolina game in the final, this might be, I mean, is this one of the more difficult games you've ever seen? Just like with how good Salt Lake is, and you're playing them on the second night of a back-to-back in altitude. I don't know how you get that. I don't know a harder situation for the Empire.
No, this will probably be the biggest challenge of the season so far. I mean, Atlanta was a very good team, or is a very good team. DC is a good team. But I will say I'm very excited for the Salt Lake game and the Colorado game, just because those teams are definitely going to shoot a little more. Mm-hmm. I know DC this past weekend was missing, Ort, Merriman, Merrill, some of the players they, maybe would throw a little deep to, or just, big bodies, open up the field. But DC played a lot of small ball this past weekend, and I think that really hurt them in the long run, especially when they needed to, you said they ground out a really long point at one point near the end of the game, and it's like, you need to score a few more goals if you're going to have any chance of winning this. And they just let time go down. And they had players streaking deep who were pretty open, and they just didn't throw it. And, I think DC's highest goal scorer this season might be Johnny Malks as a handler. So, it shows how they small ball, and they really stuck to it last weekend. They needed to open up the field to, kind of help things along and maybe try and not lose just based on the clock situation there. So whatever. Moving forward, very excited about Salt Lake and Colorado. I think we'll see more of an aerial battle. They might not be afraid to challenge Yacht if they see the right separation. Or Orion Cable got, I wouldn't say the best of Yacht, but they traded blows for a bit there. So if Salt Lake and Colorado are willing to do that, we could be in for some very exciting games.
Yeah, and another player that we haven't really mentioned was Grant Lindsley, who has this season played 7 games, and while he kind of was traveling for those games, it sounds like he is now like set up shop there for the rest of the season, as they will also host in the West, having beaten Colorado, and Colorado is also going to be in the playoffs, and whether it's LA or Oakland, I mean, it's going to be a fun 2-3 matchup. But Salt Lake has earned the right to be called the number one. It's not just 1-2. That being, because no offense to Philly and Boston, but that's what it feels like in the East, right? It's New York and DC feel like 1 and 2. You establish that, then who is the third? But the West is very much like we know who 1 is. That's established. We kind of know who 2 is. That's Colorado, and then who is 3, being LA or Oakland, who are 2 very good teams as well. Yeah, and we didn't even mention other guys like Jace Dunabal, just players that are racking up numbers like 28 goals, 14 assists. Kerr's got 30 and 36 with goals and assists. And that Salt Lake offense is so multifaceted, as you mentioned. They're not, I wouldn't call them hockey happy at all. I would say that they have this superior athleticism. And that is why I say that, no disrespect to the offense for the Empire O, even the with Joe Clutton coming back, the Salt Lake D is very similar to things that the Empire O has seen already this season. Like, yes, they're also going to be having to grind out on the second day. They're going to be missing some lungs, and the game might feel like it comes down to them. But once again, this Empire D has been transcended. There are arguments that this is the best, I want to say 14, but 16 regular D-line contributors that any team has ever had. Ever. Like, I mean, that is how good historically
by far
this Empire D-line has been. And this Salt Lake O, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back to, I mean, I guess I'm thinking of the Spiders O-lines, where the Spiders O-line, led by Bo Kittredge, was stretching deep, Marcelo Sanchez, they had a way of, yes, Aslan Joy could kill you, and Cassian Rasmussen, they could kill you in the short space, sure. They had just really athletic handlers with a lot of throws, sure. But their verticality was so precise. And it wasn't just, again, huck happy. They weren't just like, when are we going to take chances? When are we going to, it has to come. Salt Lake, everything feels like it's coming in rhythm in a way that it does. It reminds me of that Spiders offense quite a bit from the Bo Kittredge and Marcelo Sanchez era. I mean, a little less than the flamethrower stuff there. But yeah, they just have so many. I mean, Eli Jaime, we haven't mentioned him either. Guys just fit perfectly in their roles, and they run so hard. They all seem to be taller than us, right? They all seem to be like 6 foot, 6'1". I don't know what they're feeding them out in Salt Lake, but they all just seem to be tall and long and fast. And yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see. To me, it comes down to a lot of the coaching and the matchups, where I think for Charlie Hoppus and Anthony Nunez, their defenders are so versatile, and they do have so many tier 1 handler defenders and tier 1 cutter defenders in Yacht and in Antoine Davis. But I think there are ways that they could get their matchups right and get them wrong. And I'm really interested to see how they go about that, how they say, okay, this player on the Empire is going to really profile and is going to give us the best chance of slowing down player X, right? I'm interested to see how they kind of compartmentalize the Salt Lake offense, because there are so many players that just can go vertical, are young and athletic, and can run. And it does feel like it's the same player over and over and over again, with Jordan Kerr, I think, being one of the big exceptions. But I'm interested to see what qualities they find in those Salt Lake players and offensive players to say, okay, that's going to be what we're going to try to stop with this player. I think there are the adjustments on matchups are going to be interesting to watch in that game too, because at one point are Charlie Hoppus and Anthony Nunez going to almost admit to say, actually, maybe that player would be better on this player, and let's change that matchup midway through the second, just because we have to give a different look, because they're figuring, that matchup, it just isn't working. And I think yeah.
That's something they've done in some other games too. I mean, it's not just like Josue covers Rowan and the story. I mean,
Right.
they had other players cover some of the other threats and kind of mix and match and see. And when you can do that also and still get pretty good coverage on somebody, it also makes it harder for the offensive players then, because you're not like, okay, well, I beat them doing this, I'm going to do it again and again. It's okay, well, I just made a nice deep cut. That was great. okay, now yachts on me. All right, I'll try and grind for the under here. Keeping the offense out of rhythm and just feeling safe, that can go a long way too. And one of the things, Salt Lake looks like they're having a lot of fun when they're playing, and especially when things are going well. So, just maybe it'll be interesting to see how they respond to the pressure, because I think the Empire defense is probably the best in the league, and it'll be interesting to see how they respond, if they can navigate some of those poaches, all of that pressure. And yeah, I'm excited. I think it's going to be great.
Well, it's been a while, but yeah, being 21 and winning is, I mean, is there anything better of being being 21 and winning, running around, not feeling any pain, no residual hurt after a game, and winning games. Yeah, 10-0. So that is what's coming up. I'll have a preview with a bit more numbers and matchups and things like that coming up next week. But yeah, we got the weekend off because the Empire earned that 9-0. That's why the way they set up their schedule for a reason. As you know, in recent years, the Empire have set up their season in a way that they have more bye weeks in the second half, almost anticipating that they're going to be doing some postseason playing, and they will, and they're taking care of business, so they don't have to do an East Division semi game, which you remember, there was a lot of those East Division semi games. You used to have to do those, and now to not have to do that game, I think it's helpful for their postseason. But as I said, I mean, we might get postseason previews before that with the Salt Lake matchup coming up next Saturday. Again, it's Colorado on Friday, Salt Lake on Saturday, preview coming out before that. And you can watch all that on AUDL.tv. But Matt, congratulations on being a part of the Empire for 9 of their 10 seasons in some capacity. And I think more importantly, being friends with at least the first player to reach 200 blocks in the AUDL, because one of them will get it. So congratulations on that as well. And thank you to you, the listeners, for joining us for another show on the New York Empire podcast. We'll talk to you soon.